For when we talk about why avoidants lose control around super empaths, we have to start with the foundation of emotional awareness. For avoidants survive by creating distance from their own feelings. That's their safety mechanism. They regulate their lives by avoiding intimacy. For by pushing away what feels overwhelming and by convincing themselves that emotions are too messy to handle. They build walls not just around other people, but around themselves, and for the most part, it works until they come across someone who operates at an entirely different frequency, the super empath. Now, a super empath isn't just empathetic. We're not talking about someone who is simply kind or sensitive. We're talking about someone whose radar for human emotion is so sharp that they can detect the subtle shifts in tone, the micro-expressions, the silence that speaks louder than words. Where others get distracted, a super empath notices. Where others are fooled, a super empath sees straight through. That kind of awareness cuts right into the heart of an avoidance strategy. Because avoidance only works when people let the silence slide. When people accept the distance, when people don't notice the shutdown. But the super empath notices everything. Think about it. The avoidant has built their identity around control. Controlling what they show, controlling what they hide. Controlling when they step forward and when they pull back. But the super empath's presence exposes the cracks in that control. It's like a spotlight shining in a dark room. Suddenly, the avoidant isn't the one deciding what gets revealed. The super empath brings awareness to emotions the avoidant didn't even want to acknowledge within themselves. And this is the part that really shakes them. Once something has been seen, it can't be unseen. You see, most people will meet an avoidant where they are. If the avoidant says, I need space, people back off. If they close down, people accept the wall. But a super empath doesn't just accept the surface level story. They sense the hurt behind the silence. They feel the fear behind the distance. And instead of chasing or begging, they name it. They hold up that mirror calmly, without aggression, without drama. And for the avoidant, that's terrifying. Because in that moment, they're not just seen by another person. They're confronted by their own reflection. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that super empaths don't just bring awareness to others, they live with deep awareness of themselves. They've done the work. They've walked through their own shadows. They felt the full weight of emotion without running from it. And that gives them a presence that is unshakable. The avoidant can't manipulate it, can't distort it, can't escape it. They're used to people bending under pressure, but the super empath doesn't bend. They stand steady, not because they're trying to control, but because they've learned how to accept what is. That kind of presence makes avoidance impossible. Imagine trying to hide in a room with mirrors on every wall. That's what it feels like for an avoidant around a super empath. Every attempt to withdraw only reflects them back to themselves. Every attempt to deny their feelings is quietly acknowledged and held. And this creates a kind of pressure. Not the pressure of judgment, but the pressure of truth. And truth is the one thing avoidants have spent their whole lives trying to escape. This is why they lose control. It's not because the empath is trying to overpower them. It's not because the empath is demanding change. It's because the empath's awareness breaks the illusion of control altogether. And once the illusion is gone, the avoidant has to face what's really there. The fear, the longing, the vulnerability. That's when they feel naked, unprepared, exposed. And here's the paradox. The very thing they run from, emotional awareness, is the very thing that could set them free. But standing in the presence of a super empath, they no longer have the option to pretend it doesn't exist. The truth is, awareness is the end of control. And when you strip away control, what's left is real connection. Perfect. Let's take key point 2 and expand it into a full 600-word segment in the same deep, motivational, Tony Robbins' style flow, so it connects seamlessly after the first one. If the first thing that disarms an avoidant is the super empath's awareness, the second is even more disruptive to their sense of control, boundaries that cannot be manipulated. Avoidants are masters at using distance to dictate the rhythm of a relationship. They don't argue loudly, they don't always fight directly. Instead, they pull back, they withdraw affection, they retreat into silence, they disappear emotionally, sometimes even physically. And most people respond to that withdrawal exactly the way the avoidant expects. They chase, they plead, they overextend themselves to regain connection. In that moment, the avoidant has the upper hand. They feel safe again. because they've shifted the balance of power in their favor. But a super empath doesn't play that game. They don't chase in desperation. They don't collapse under the weight of abandonment tactics. 4. They don't beg someone to come back to the table. Why? Because their strength is not built on dependency. Their strength is built on self-respect. 4. They have cultivated an inner foundation that says, I know who I am. I know what I deserve. 4. And I will not sacrifice my dignity just to keep you close. That kind of boundary is unshakable. And to the avoidant, 4. It's unsettling in ways they can't articulate. Think about how powerful that is. An avoidant pulls back expecting control, but instead of being pursued, 4. They're met with calm, immovable strength. It doesn't come with anger or ultimatums. It's not about punishment. It's simply a refusal to abandon the self. 4. And that refusal changes the dynamic completely. Because suddenly the avoidant realizes they can no longer dictate the terms of connection. 4. The old strategies of withdrawal and withholding stop working. The power they thought they had evaporates in the face of boundaries that don't bend. 4. And here's the fascinating part. Those boundaries don't come from a place of coldness. They're not walls built out of fear. They're rooted in love. 4. But love balanced with wisdom. The super empath doesn't need to control the avoidant, nor do they need to prove their worth by chasing. 4. They already know their value, and that knowledge creates a presence that cannot be manipulated. It's not aggressive. It's not passive. It's sovereign. 4. For an avoidant, this feels like losing control because they are confronted with something they're not used to. A relationship where their usual push-pull tactics don't work. They can no longer disappear into silence without consequences. 4. They can no longer pull strings from a distance. Instead, they're forced to face the reality that connection is a choice, not a game of control. 4. And that terrifies them because it means they can no longer dictate the pace of intimacy without being exposed. What's really happening here is profound. 4. The super empath is teaching the avoidant, whether consciously or not, 4. That boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the framework that makes real love possible. Without boundaries, love becomes manipulation. Without boundaries, 4. And love becomes control. And the empath refuses to participate in that illusion. They don't punish, they don't chase, they simply stand firm in their truth. That's why avoidants feel like they're losing control around super empaths. Because for the first time, they meet someone who cannot be bent, cannot be bought, cannot be broken by distance. And in that moment, the avoidant comes face to face with the truth they've been avoiding all along. For control is not the same thing as connection. And here's the ultimate paradox. What the avoidant fears most, the loss of control, 4. Is actually the doorway to the very intimacy they crave. And it is the super empath's boundaries that hold that doorway open. The message is clear. 4. When you stop chasing control and you start respecting boundaries, that's when real connection begins. 4. Got it? Let's expand key point 3 into a full 600-word segment that keeps the same flow, intensity, and Tony Robbins style delivery. So it naturally builds on awareness and boundaries, while moving into the power of the mirror effect. 4. What really dismantles an avoidant sense of control is something even deeper than awareness and boundaries. It's what I call the mirror effect. 4. And it happens effortlessly when a super empath is in the room. You see, an avoidant spends their life trying to suppress, deny, 4. Or escape their own emotional reality. They run from vulnerability, they avoid confrontation with their inner wounds, and they keep their fears hidden, or even from themselves. But when they come face to face with a super empath, it's like standing in front of a mirror they didn't ask for. 4. Everything they thought they had buried, everything they thought they could keep locked away, comes back to stare at them through another human being. 4. This is not because the empath is trying to expose them or manipulate them. That's not how it works. 4. The mirror effect happens because the super empath is fully present, deeply aware, and emotionally tuned in. They don't just hear words. 4. They hear what's behind the words. They don't just see the behavior, they see the intention behind it. And most importantly, 4. They reflect that truth back, not through judgment, not through confrontation, but simply by being who they are. Their empathy makes them a living mirror. And when you stand in front of a mirror, you cannot deny your reflection. That's where the avoidant loses their grip. 4. They've built their lives around controlling perception, deciding what people can see and what they cannot. But with a super empath, that control disappears. 4. The empath doesn't chase illusions. They don't get caught up in the mask. They see straight through to what's real. 4. And that forces the avoidant into a position they despise: vulnerability. Because in that moment, they are no longer in control of what's visible. The mirror shows everything. Imagine how destabilizing that must feel. For years, maybe decades. 4. An avoidant has convinced themselves that their inner fears are hidden from the world. They've believed that their strategies, distance, detachment, for withdrawal, protect them from being seen. But in the presence of a super empath, all of that comes undone. The empath reflects their longing for connection, or their fear of abandonment, their shame, their insecurities. It all comes rushing back, not because the empath calls it out aggressively, but because the empath's presence is too honest to deny. And here's the powerful part: the mirror doesn't just expose the pain, it also reveals the potential. For the super empath reflects not only the wounds, but the love that's buried underneath, the humanity the avoidant has been too afraid to embrace. That's why the experience is so overwhelming. On one hand, it terrifies the avoidant to be seen so clearly. On the other hand, it awakens something deep inside them, the recognition that real intimacy is possible if only they stop running. But the paradox is this: the avoidant can't control what's being reflected. They can't dim the mirror, they can't distort it, they can't silence it. And that's why they feel like they're losing control around super empaths. They're forced to confront themselves in a way they've never had to before. And self-confrontation is the one battle they've always tried to avoid. You want to know why this is so life-changing? Because when you are finally faced with a mirror you can't look away from, you either run from it or you grow from it. The super empath gives the avoidant a choice they've been avoiding their whole lives: deny the truth or transform because of it. And the truth is this: the mirror never lies. Alright, let's bring key point 4 to life with a full 600-word expansion flowing naturally after awareness. Boundaries and the mirror effect, ending with a strong, resonant closing statement in that Tony Robbins style delivery. If awareness disarms the avoidant, if boundaries break their patterns, and if the mirror effect exposes their hidden truths, then what finally strips away the last illusion of control is the combination of love and strength that defines the super empath. It's a paradox most people can't carry, but the super empath lives it effortlessly: compassion without weakness, strength without aggression. And for the avoidant, this is a force they simply cannot manage, cannot manipulate, and cannot escape. You see, avoidants are used to extremes. They're used to people who either chase them in desperation or people who retaliate with anger when the avoidant withdraws. Both responses, in their own way, confirm the avoidant's belief that intimacy is dangerous. But the super empath doesn't react with either desperation or hostility. They love with depth, yet they refuse to abandon themselves. They extend compassion, but they do it with unshakable dignity. And that creates a dynamic the avoidant cannot control. This is the heart of it: love without fear. Most people's love is entangled with fear: fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. That fear makes them cling, makes them overcompensate, makes them accept less than they deserve. Avoidants count on that fear to maintain control. But the super empath operates differently. Their love is abundant, but it's not needy. It's generous, but it's not self-sacrificing. It comes from a place of freedom, not desperation. And because it comes from freedom, it cannot be manipulated. At the same time, their strength is not about control. It's not about dominating the other person or forcing them to change. It's the strength of self-respect, of knowing where they stand, of refusing to compromise their worth. And that balance, love without fear, strength without control, is exactly what makes avoidants lose their footing. Because in that balance, the avoidant loses every point of leverage they thought they had. Think about it. If they withdraw, the super empath doesn't crumble. If they test boundaries, the super empath doesn't bend. If they try to push love away, the super empath's compassion remains steady, untainted by fear. It's like standing in front of a force of nature, gentle and nurturing, yet powerful and immovable. That combination breaks the avoidant's illusion of control once and for all. And here's what makes it so profound. For the avoidant, losing control in this way is not a defeat, it's an invitation. It's an opening to experience love in its purest form. Love that doesn't demand. Love that doesn't collapse, love that doesn't control. It's the one thing they've been running from and longing for at the same time. And in the presence of a super empath, they are forced to confront the truth that this kind of love exists. Now, will every avoidant accept that invitation? No. For some will run harder than ever, terrified of the vulnerability they see reflected back. But some will pause. Some will recognize that what they are losing is not control. It's the prison of control. And what they are gaining is the possibility of connection. That's why super empaths are so powerful. They don't break avoidance by force, they unravel them by presence. They don't demand surrender, they inspire it. They don't expose weakness, they reveal truth. And in that revelation, the avoidant faces the choice they've been avoiding their whole lives. For keep clinging to control or step into the freedom of love. And that's the final lesson. Control may feel safe, but it's never love. And love, for when it is free and fearless, is the one thing that cannot be controlled.